Hi, everyone. Want to thank you for joining today, and also a big thank you again to Jim Bush and the Winkler Group for presenting today, but also for your continued support and partnership with AFP, Lowcountry, and also Together SC. But as the president of the Association of Fundraising Professionals Lowcountry chapter, I want to welcome you all here today to what I think is going to be a great informative session that will help us as fundraisers know where to go. It will be a good navigation piece for us looking for the remainder of this year with Year in Giving and even into next year as well. Bryson?
I'm Bryson. I co-chair Together SC's Development Peer Network with Brett. Brett's a very busy guy in this fundraising world. And really what we're here to do is supplement what AFP does, but also provide resources for nonprofits. And we just think that this report and Winkler being willing to present on it is going to be such a fabulous tool to have in the toolbox. So thank you so much, Winkler, and we'll turn it over to you to get started. You're muted.
I did it. I did the thing that I can't stand doing is I talk while I was muted. My apologies, gang. Hey, give me one sec here as well. I'm going to, there we go. Hey, everybody, can you hear me? We're good. We get some thumbs up there. Okay, fantastic. I'm going to minimize. It takes a minute to get all these controls in place. Gang, good morning. I'm Jim Bush. I'm the CEO of the Winkler Group. For those of you who don't know us, we're based in Charleston, and we're a national firm. We have folks all on the ground all over the country, and we work primarily in major gifts as well as campaigns. And I'm super excited today, though, to talk to you as both an editor on the editorial review board for the GivingUSA report, and that is also a member of the National Task Force on Generosity, which I'm going to tell you about in just a few minutes. Gang, what we're going to talk about today are some really important takeaways from last year's GivingUSA report. Now, it's called the GivingUSA 2024. It reports back on the giving for 2023. As we set the landscape, let me first also just say another quick thank you. Though you got to hear from both Brett and Bryson, I want to say thank you as well, because it's these kinds of partnerships that allow us to really elevate the discussion that we're going to have today. And the more informed we can all be as fundraisers and as practitioners, then the better that we can do to serve our communities, grow our missions, and really develop strong relationships with donors. And that's the essence of what all of this is about today. So let me tell you how we're going to get there. So first, I'm going to give you a good but quick understanding of the fundraising landscape and what we are now calling the generosity crisis. Gang, as we walk through this first part, you're gonna probably start to feel a bit overwhelmed with the landscape as it looks like today, because I'm not sharing great news. I will, though, tell you that as we walk through this and we talk about some really important issues that we have and some declines that we need to address in this generosity crisis, we're not going to stop there. What we're then really going to talk about is, okay, how do we then find some takeaways from this? What can you do starting this afternoon and tomorrow and starting next week and keep it going to really help turn this generosity crisis around? You're going to hear both information that comes directly from the GivingUSA report and the work we're doing, the work that I'm doing with colleagues all around the country in the generosity task force. And really importantly, and this is, I think, probably the most important piece of what you're going to hear about, is we do thousands of donor interviews a year in campaigns that we do, in major gift work we do, in assessments that we do. We are boots on the ground every day talking to donors. And I'm going to tell you what they're saying to us, because the people we should be listening to are the people who have the capacity and inclination to make major investments in our organizations. So that's what I want to make sure you're hearing from them. And so I'll share that. I promise to start with some charts and graphs and to give you an understanding of what the fundraising landscape looks like. please know this is a lot of information to get at one time. It's kind of like drinking from a fire hose. So after this session today, we're both going to send you the recording. It'll take a little while for the recording to finish and for it to be ready. We're also going to send you the slide deck. So don't need you to worry about trying to take all those notes or pictures of that. I want your involvement and participation. So what I want you to do instead, start thinking of questions. You may already have them. If you do, find that Q&A function within the Zoom panel, start putting those questions in, and we'll answer questions at the end. We'll make sure, and I'll make this commitment to you. If we don't have time to answer your question or we don't answer in enough detail, you can follow up with us and we'll make sure to get the answers you're looking for. So my commitment to you is to give you a lot of great information. I hope you'll think it's great, useful anyway. And your commitment is to listen and also ask questions and for us to have a conversation. Let's look at giving first as we start our landscape assessment of giving last year. So we know that we're 8 months into 2024 already, and we're looking back at 2023 giving. So in total, if you look at this chart, the gray lines that you're looking at are giving, and this is from 1983 through last year. So we look at that long span so we can begin to see trends. Those yellow bars that you see are recession years. Times when we would expect, and in fact, did see giving stay flat or go down. Now, as we look at that trend line, that dotted line that you see, we are looking at a trend of giving going up. But I want you to look most importantly at years, the last 3 bars on this chart, which is 21, 22, and 23. And you'll see that in 20 and 21, I should say, we saw lots of giving, and that was in response to COVID. So that was a fantastic year. In 2022, we saw giving go down. Not surprising. We expected that to be adjustment. We expected to get back to normal giving, and we saw that. But here's what we saw in 2023, giving went down. That's a trend going in the wrong direction. There have only been a few times that this has happened, and it doesn't happen outside of a recession. And so this is something that we should all be concerned about. Next here, as we look at this, is where giving came from. By and far, giving came from individuals. So 67%. And if you add the 8% from bequests, then you get over 70%. That looks like what, 75% of that giving that came from individuals directly or indirectly. Now, that's important to understand that that's down from prior years. So, and we'll see this in just a moment when we talk about those trends. Giving went down. Now we saw bequests go up a little bit. We saw, and that's about the only area that we saw growth in. And so it is, again, really concerning for us as we look at these contributions. Individual giving in particular has really gone down. Now we look at that foundation giving. I'll talk more about that in just a moment. As we look at what foundations are doing, we are seeing some individuals turn their giving from giving individually to giving through DAFs. So we're going to see a bit of a change in the market because of that, but we'll explain how that works in just a moment. So we know now where giving came from. Let's look at the total here in a different way. Let's look at whether it was increased or increased. So the orange, gold, or those lines you're looking at, that's giving from 21 to 22. The blue lines are giving from 22 to 23. And we're looking at changes cumulatively during these periods. Now, if you look then at the blue lines, that's the one we really want to pay attention to because it tells us what happened last year. You can see individual giving went down, foundation giving went down, corporate giving went down, bequests went up slightly. And that's frankly because of a couple of big bequests. There were about 5 that were giant that swayed that number just a little bit. But if we took those outliers out, bequest giving would have been flat or even a little bit decreased. So again, painting the picture for you of what we're looking at. Now, this next slide is, again, a lot of data to look at. So let me break it down. On the left side, 1983, we're looking at who received those gifts. On the right side is 2023. Couple of big notes here. If you look at 1983 and you look at that the blue slice of this pie, almost like a Pac-Man type slice, that was giving to religion, which was 63% back then. Look at this. In 2023, religious giving has dropped to 24%. Gang, last year was the first time that we recorded that less than half of the American population attended church. That has a direct correlation on giving, because if folks go to church, they tend to be much more philanthropic. They first give to their church, and because they're taught to give through their church, that is something that they learn. And we know that folks who give through their church tend to be more philanthropic. Statistically, we see that. So what shifted here? Notice in 2023, we see that human services went up. We see that health went up. And then we see gifts to grant-making foundations. That's your DAFs, gang. So that's where we understand that folks gave to those DAFs. So that should be a pass-through. We should see then those foundation grants, gifts through DAFs going to organizations. The problem with that is the DAF funds are holding on to those. Donors are making those gifts, but those dollars are sitting in those funds and not being given. However, here's the important message. Instead of giving to religion, we're seeing a shift that donors are giving directly to causes that religious organizations like ministries would have supported. Now donors are bypassing the religion and are giving direct to those organizations. And by the way, that ought to be a key message that I want you to take note of, because this idea that donors want to give directly and they want a direct relationship is important. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. Now, let's take a quick look at what happened in South Carolina. The National Council of Nonprofits, they did a survey of South Carolina nonprofits, and here's what we got back. Almost 66% of you said that you expect or anticipate the amount of donations to decline or remain flat. And we're looking at this year. 74%, almost 74% said that you expect the number of donors to decline or remain flat. However, on the flip side of that, and this is not the direction we don't want to see a longer gap or this line starting to extend. The demand of services between 2019 and 2021 is going up 52%. Demand's going up, and we're seeing a supply of those dollars to support that going down. I really understand I'm not painting a great picture here, but I promise you, as we start to connect the dots about what do we do about this, it'll be a brighter picture, because we'll have some absolute strategies and tactics that we can use. Now, let's take a quick look at the economy last year. If we looked at the economy and all of these indicators, it should speak to the fact that giving went up. We had one of the most robust economies on record. Again, this is statistically. Let's take out the politics here. I don't care who you're listening to. Someone's going to complain about the politically complain about the economy. The fact is, though, it was robust. Look at the S&P. It grew 24% last year. That marker alone, if the S&P grows, when the stock market grows, giving goes up, because a majority of major donors are going to fund those campaign investments, those major gifts through their stock holdings. We would expect that when the market goes up, giving to go up. There's always a lag. The market's got to go up. The money's got to get in people's accounts. Then they got to decide what to do with it, and then they make their gifts. And by the way, we're hoping to see, because the market is up, we're hoping that that is then going to translate to bigger giving as we move forward in the next year and year and a half. Disposable income grew, corporate profits increased, which, by the way, isn't a great sign. It's great, but that is part of an issue today. Is while corporate profits are going up, folks that are everyday donors, our non-major donors, aren't seeing those dollars saved. Instead, they're seeing prices go up, which is an issue for us as well. And this is the last big one, because this consumer spending went up 6%. That's really important. And I'll tell you why in just a second. But do remember that consumer spending, it means it's not that everyone's got more money or we have a better economy and people are saying, oh, I need something to do with this money. Not at all. They're out there spending the money. They're buying boats. They're doing home repairs. They're going on those vacations. If you've been on a plane anytime in the last year, holy cow, every plane's full, no matter where you're going. People are spending money. The problem with that last year is nobody or less people were giving. No one was thinking about the philanthropic giving. Instead, they were thinking about how to spend those money on other ways. Every area that we track went down. Giving overall, the number of donors, giving as a percentage of GDP fell to 2%. By the way, it's typically around that 2%, but we had gone up and we were hoping to see that trend stay. It went back down. Corporate giving fell by 1%, which again, I mentioned that earlier, corporate profits are up. But if you're hearing the corporate profit reports for many companies, most companies were hearing big gains. We're hearing lots of profit. However, they're not translating that profit into giving. And then the last one, and this is the one that we should all be absolutely concerned about as well, is that donor retention fell in every donor type. All right. So brand new donors didn't give again. Donors that had been giving didn't give again. Every donor type or area and every type of donor, alumni, parents, grateful patients, again, all across the board, we saw donor retention go down. We can point to things that we think could be the reason. And these are all things that perhaps could impact giving. Why may that? And we heard some of these last year in the interviews that we did. Lack of trust. I don't know if you guys have pay attention to, but across my news feed just came in, I believe it was earlier this week. GLAD, the organization, there's a controversy because their executive director, their CEO, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on things like trips and renovating her home office, $20,000, putting a chandelier in. You know, those stories, they first hit in our journals, but now those stories are starting to be picked up by mainstream media. So that kind of stuff creates a lack of trust. We can absolutely argue that the tax policy changes, the rise of the standard deduction, so that those mid-level donors now don't have the ability to itemize. It does it right. They take the standard deduction. So giving becomes less. If you're looking at it from a tax perspective, it becomes less of a priority. We understand there's a ton of disconnection on social media because, right, tons of white noise and declining church attendance. People who go to church statistically are more philanthropic. If they're not going to church, not only do we not see giving go up, but remember what happens when we pass the plate at church. It's not just that the gifts come in, but you take your family to church. Your kids see you put the envelope or the money, or you hand them the money and they put it in the offering tray. That's a really important lesson that we teach about generosity over generation and generation. We're not learning that. If we're not going to church, we're not passing the plate. Our kids aren't seeing it. So we're not teaching our kids to be generous. Gang, these aren't the main reasons though. Here's the main reason. And I'm telling you, this is what donors said to us over and over and over. We as a sector did not do enough to convince donors to give to our organizations instead of spending it. I'm going to say this in a slightly different way. Giving is a value proposition. People place value on what they do with those dollars. We didn't convince them that not putting the pool in or not buying the boat or not going on that vacation, we didn't convince them that giving to an organization to support the really worthy missions that all of you have, we didn't convince donors that that was important enough. And the problem here is we had done that in the past. This is the first year that we're hearing from donors that said, I found other things to do because I didn't feel like I was convinced I needed to give to my nonprofits. Here's the generosity crisis in a nutshell, this slide right here. And as we think about this moving forward, I want you to think about this word and the concept that comes with it. I want you to think about the word investor. What donors said to us is, and they didn't use these words, they didn't say, I don't feel like an investor, but what they said to us is, we don't feel like we have access to leadership. I don't feel like my opinion is needed. I feel like I'm an ATM. I don't feel like I have perspective on why what you want to do is important to the mission. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment. What I want you to know right now is I want you to understand that idea of investor and the words and concepts that go with it is how we're going to solve this generosity crisis. All right, so first takeaway, how do we solve the crisis? We've got to build better donor relationships. That's number one. Donors are telling that. They're saying that to us. You know, there's this moment for a donor when they care deeply about a problem that needs to be solved. All of you in the work that you do, you are working to solve a problem. The donor, if we are doing our job of treating the donor like an investor, you are working on a problem and solving a problem that they care deeply about. When we can intersect their passion, and more importantly, and this is a really important part of what we're sharing today, when they can understand that you have, as an organization, a unique zone of genius to solve that problem, when we can intersect those two, that's when transformational giving happens. So you ask yourself right now, are we really articulating the problem that we're trying to solve? Are we clear in that problem? And number one, are we clear? Secondly, are we involving our donors in helping to solve this problem? Are we getting their perspective? Are we answering their questions? Are we building a relationship so that they feel like we have the unique zone of genius to solve that problem? How are we going to do this? Here's some questions for you. If you know the answers to these questions and you can say yes, that is a fantastic first step. But what I can tell you is, in doing this work every day with clients, we often see that in pulling a list so we can start to talk to our top donors, that we have organizations that don't know who they are. They don't know necessarily who their top 25 donors are. We often get in the situation where we're preparing to make phone calls to invite donors to sit down and give us feedback about some critical priorities that an organization wants to tackle, and we don't have phone numbers. Sometimes we have been in the situation where we don't have phone numbers for the top 25 donors. And what we're hearing more and more of is, oh, well, we don't call them. We email them or we contact them through social media. Gang, that is not, think about an investor. If you can't pick up your phone, if they're not stored in your phone and you can't hit a button and call them, are they really truly an investor for you? Because if you can't reach each other, you can't get feedback. You can't grow that relationship. And are you prioritizing real donor cultivation and stewardship, that genuine loving on your donors over acquisition and solicitation? Because what we're hearing, you may say, yeah, we are. But I want you to think a little bit deeper, because we're hearing from organizations every day we're working with who say, we're doing a great job here. When we sit down to have the donor interview, donors say, you know what? I really do feel like I'm an ATM. I feel like the only time I hear from them is they might want to ask me something, but it's really a veiled solicitation. And I'm getting kind of tired of it. So answer these questions and really dig deep on that last one. Are you really prioritizing genuine, authentic donor cultivation? I'll say it a different way, building that donor relationship in a really authentic way. If you're not, understand you're not alone. And I want to talk about retention. You can look at this as a big chart. What it really says to you is, hey, gang, retention's becoming the biggest issue. Now, it's been one for a while, but it is really starting to get out of hand. And if you look at this chart, we're talking about here, if you the better job you do of donor retention, you look at what donors, if you could take a look at the top chart with an attrition rate of 20%, after 5 years, you'd still have 328 donors. If you think about keeping 328 donors at 5 years, that's pretty incredible. But let's look at it from the other perspective, because we're seeing more of what this bottom chart looks like. You put 1,000 donors in the room. Let's pretend like you got 1,000 donors in your room and they give. And let's look at next year. With a 60% attrition rate, only 400 of those donors are still going to be in that room. And you can go down the line to look at 5 years. In 5 years, those 1,000 donors, you've got 10 donors left standing. That is an incredible loss of relationship here. And if we think about a donor and their lifetime value with us, now we've lost all the ability for us to grow the mission because those donors are gone. By the way, we're hearing from donors that when they leave, they're not likely to come back. That is a key message donors are telling us today. Because when we talk to a donor who stopped giving, we ask the questions, what made you stop giving? Well, you asked me too much. You didn't say thanks. I don't even know what you're doing. And plus, I don't know what happens to the dollars that you gave for the last project. No one talked to me about it. And now all of a sudden we're going to do this, and no one's asked me my opinion. So I left and I went somewhere else because they treated me like I was a partner to them. I hope that you know what your retention rates are. And I hope you know not just what it was last year, but can you look at a trend? Do you know what the last 5-year trend for your organization is in regards to retention? If not, it's something you ought to get, because you need to see, is this leaky bucket getting leakier, or are you starting to close those leaks? What I love about the conversation that we're having, and by the way, that's all the bad stuff. To me, that's all the stuff that's the negative. We're not going to focus on how do we then get out of this? How do we solve the crisis? It's really a lot easier than we think. I think we're making this hard. We see a lot of statistics today, and we see a lot of research done around consumer trends and what we ought to think about with donors in relation to consumers. I think there's just one thing, and I'll tell you about that in just a minute. But what I want to say to you first is this is not rocket science. This is really easy to see a bigger ROI. Let me give you a case study first, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this. Now, in this case study, you're going to see some big dollar amounts. And so I don't want you to focus on that. What I want you to focus on is what the growth looked like, because that's really the message here. All right, here it is. We have a client we were working in, and they're called the St. Matthew's House. They're in Naples, Florida. In a single year, they were able to achieve 59% increase in annual giving. Now, for them, that's 6.2 million more. Don't get wrapped up on this and go, okay, well, this is not like me. We don't raise anything near that. That's not the message here, gang. Let's pretend like that was $600,000 more. The fact is they raised more money. That's the important part of the message. And giving is on track to be even higher this year, at the end of this year. How did they do it? Well, they had an event happen that forced them to make some changes. They had a donor who was a major benefactor, and major meaning they were focused on giving a lot of those dollars that this organization brought in. That major donor became upset and they left. When they left, that was a giant hole. They weren't sure how to fill it. So we went back to basics. We went back and said, let's start really thinking about building authentic relationships. Let's stop relying on those 4 or 5 largest donors, because you may be in the same situation, because we hear this a lot. We have a couple of benefactors. They're aging out. What do we do now? Well, what we do now is we start building relationships with other donors. We did some predictive AI predictive analysis with them. We did some wealth screen. We started really identifying who are those donors we wanted to build the authentic relationships with. Because again, gang, we're talking about major gifts here. Every donor is valuable. Every donor should be loved on. But in our reality and in the context of our conversation today, we're really focused on major giving. So hear me loud and clear. Every donor should feel like a hero. Right now, we're talking about overcoming a giant deficit. And how do we do it? We're focused on major donors to do that. So they started really building those relationships. And without fail, they dedicated their time, not to more galas, not to more events. They dedicated their time to having at least 3 and more often 5 coffee or lunch meetings every week. They found out why their donors gave. They asked the questions. They found out more about their donors. They talked about and got donors to talk about the problems that they solve as an organization. And they got to hear the donors' passion for wanting to solve those problems. That's the critical piece that's so important here. How do you learn more about that? How do you find out about their passions? How do you keep them engaged? The first thing I would say is if you haven't done any sort of prospect or donor capacity analysis, that's the first place to start. You ought to be looking at all of your donors. You ought to be looking at what their true giving capacity is. At the same time, we now have predictive AI in our world that allows us to look at people who have patterns of giving and engagement in areas where our mission is active. And I say it another way. They give to other organizations. They care about this. Even some of their spending habits show that this is important. So we can actually now find a list of suspects. They're not prospects yet because they're not in your database. They've not given, but they're suspects. People who have a high score of capacity and the propensity to give to you. We can look at what that projected growth in giving could look like, and we can help build that process to capture capacity. Now, we as a firm do that work. Organizations do it on their own. I don't care how you do it. What I care about is these are the things that you need to look at first. What capacity do you have? How do we then look outside of your current database and assess who might be interested? We all need to grow. Start within your own database. That's what's important here. That's the first takeaway, okay? Our second takeaway is this. Focus on what drives gifts. This may not be a popular thing to say, although I bet some people on this workshop will cheer, other people will laugh. We're not doing this. However, we're hearing from donors that they think you should be spending less time on events. They're getting kind of tired of galas, and they're getting kind of tired of golf tournaments and 5Ks and this is and that's. And I don't know if you're seeing a decline in event attendance, and maybe your gala is the event in the community. Maybe it's the thing people come to. Great. I will tell you this, doesn't matter where you are, if you are like other organizations and other cities, gala attendance is steadily on the decline. So at some point, that gala may not be something you can rely on. Donors are saying to us, those transactional events are getting old. And by the way, these events, every time we do this, we are training our supporters to become transactional. We're not building a relationship. We're training them to pay for something and come to it. So they come to an event and they go, oh my gosh, I made my gift. I bought my ticket. Now they've got the capacity to give exponentially more than what that ticket cost, but they've done their work. They have done what you've asked. They've paid that ticket and they're there. So when you go back and ask them again, it becomes much more difficult. What if you took all the time though that was spent on getting ready for that gala or that tournament, whatever it is, that event, and you actually refocus those and you really started having 3 to 5 coffees per week. And you started really being authentic and building those intentional relationships. You started making donors feel like they're an insider, a member, an investor. That's the word. Remember the investor word. And you start really connecting the donor and their interest. Remember, they care about the problem that you're solving. Find out how much they care. Find out where you fit within their other philanthropic interests. And if we can say you're high at their list, you've got a problem to be solved, they feel like an investor who can help solve that problem. And they feel like they know you and trust you and know you're going to do what you say. That's when that beautiful intersection that happens. Your unique zone of genius, their passion and ability to solve that problem, it comes together. That's when great things happen. Donors don't want swag. They don't want trinkets. They're tired of that. Here's what they want. They want to be treated like investors. What do investors want? Number one. So if you're an executive director today, please hear this. And if you are not the executive director, take this message back to your ED. Donors today, investors want access to leadership. They want to hear directly from that staff chief. They want to know what's going on. They want to hear it directly from you. They want to know what your plans are. They want to be able to pick up the phone and call. They want you to pick up the phone and call and say, hey, I need your input. Got some questions. I'm thinking about something. Do you have a minute? They love that because because then they feel like, oh my gosh, they're not just asking for dollars. They are truly asking my opinion, my perspective, my feedback, and my input. Make sure they can see behind the scenes. Are you acknowledging their gift? This is interesting, gang. We saw this trend again. We're looking at 20 years of doing this work as a firm, and we're looking across all sectors and across the entire country of all the campaigns that we're running. We were seeing pre-COVID a trend of public acknowledgement really going down. People didn't really care about having their name. Now, again, some people did, but we're seeing a trend. Generally, people weren't worried about that. Naming opportunities to put someone's name on something, not as popular. It's picked back up. But here's the shift. And this is, if there's a good outcome of COVID, here it is. Donors today want their name to be on something. They want to be publicly acknowledged. And sometimes they want their name to be on something because they want to be a reminder for future generations that we came together and we solved a problem. And by allowing us to publicly acknowledge and show who supported something, they feel like it sets a tone and a message to future generations. Legacy in a really positive way is becoming much more important for donors. And by the way, that's at every level, which I think is fantastic. I mentioned a moment ago, how do you start the conversation? Ask them, hey, we're thinking about something. I'd like to get your input. Hey, we've got some plans. Would you give us some feedback? I need to brainstorm. What I have found is in asking these questions, we have found donors who are involved in ways that are involved in ventures we knew nothing about. And then all of a sudden they're like, hey, you know what? I own a strip mall. We've got a space that I can give to you to do this. It wouldn't cost you anything. Holy cow. So imagine if a conversation led to something like that. These kinds of conversations where we're asking for advice and input are often leading to investment. If you want to start the conversation, best things you can ask is, why do you care? Why us? Why do you care about us? And what do we do? What problem do we solve? And how are we doing it? That unique zone of genius that makes you most proud. Now, think about building authentic relationships in the context of cultivation, and just think about how you would treat a close friend. Would you email your close friend to invite them to something, or would you text them? Or would you pick up the phone and call them? Would you send them a report and not write a personal note? Would you not ask their advice about an issue you're facing? Again, close friend, someone you would expect to trust. Would you shoot high and just say, I'll ask for $1 million? I don't think we'll get it, but let me ask, and we call that spray and pray. Will you just spray and pray and hope that you'll get something? Obviously, I think the answer to those questions are no, but these are things that we're hearing from donors. These are direct comments that come from donors in interviews that we do. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't feel like they even know me at all. And you're telling me that I'm one of their major benefactors. I don't understand. All right. That's the second takeaway. Here's our next one. Don't misread the shift in foundation giving. Because as we look at giving, you've seen this already. This was who gave. So you see this, the 82% of individuals gave in 1983. That's dropped back. And back in 83, foundation giving was 6%. Now it's 19%. Okay, so take a look at that. Now let's look at this in a slightly different way. So we're seeing that giving by individuals declining, but we're seeing some of that giving by foundations increasing. This is that shift to DAF giving. So if you're not thinking about DAFs today, you should be. You should also be talking to your individual donors about how they like to fund gifts. We are finding that even mid-level donors today are starting to consider giving via a DAF because they want to put those dollars aside today. It's like creating a savings account so that when they retire and they are on a fixed income, they will still have a pot of money that they can then give to the missions they support. Really interesting. Used to be that it was just wealthy people giving to DAFs. Not today. We're seeing the mid-level donor beginning to think about that. And so that positioning is really important. Now, as we think about that, let's really though stay focused on those individuals, because whether they're giving to the foundation as through a DAF, that's not really where they're trying to give their money. That's a holding place where they can get some tax benefit right now, but ultimately they really want it to go to an organization. So you need to keep building relationships with them. Don't go out, and we're hearing this. This is a lesson that I want you to pay attention to. Organizations are coming to us and they're saying, hey, I think we're going to pull back on some of our frontline fundraising and really focus on grant writers because foundation giving went up. No. Bad idea. Frontline fundraisers are really important. Foundations are simply the intermediaries in many cases. I understand you may have outright giving actual private or public foundations that are not DAFs. I'm not saying change your strategy there. What I am saying though is don't think that all the foundation increase is because true foundations or have those dollars. It's really individuals putting their money in that savings account to be able to give to organizations. And next, gang, we don't have time to waste. We are at that point now where we're thinking about year-end giving, and I think that's okay. We should be thinking about that, but we should also be thinking about year-end authentic relationship building and really important stewardship. I'm excited because as we look at giving for this year and in 2025, we have got a report from, it's called the Philanthropy Outlook. If you want to look it up, it's from the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. That's Indiana University. They're predicting that we'll see growth in income go up. We'll continue to see, and we're already seeing this. S&P had it crossed 40,000. We're seeing the biggest gains. It's going up and down a little, but look at the trend line. It's going up for sure. And we are seeing the average growth in net worth also go up. Yeah, no doubt prices in the grocery store are more expensive, lower level. Those everyday donors we hear, they are having a more bigger challenge, but our major donors, they are not seeing necessarily those challenges at the grocery store. What they are seeing is those dollars that they have invested going up. That gives them more giving power. So we should see, if this continues, we're hoping to see a 4% increase in 2024 and just under 4% in 2025. What I'm telling you, translating all of this is, if we do our job right and we focus on giving, we're going to see better, hopefully a sector that starts to improve, and we're hopefully going to start to see ourselves coming out of this generosity crisis. There's a report done by Dunham & Company that asks about intent to give. These are major donors. Take a look at that. We're seeing from 23 to 24, we're seeing that donors expect to give the same or more. Less or not as many donors are saying they're going to give less. Again, another factor that says to us we're seeing improvement here. We're also seeing the S&P predicted to rise. We're seeing much more interest in capital campaigns and major gifts. We are seeing some of the biggest transformational giving our firm has seen. We've been around 20 years. We are seeing that in 2024. So as I say that to you, oops, I hit the button too fast. We're seeing bigger giving. We're seeing a brighter outlook from those major donors. But again, that's only working in conjunction with us building a relationship. So where do we go next? You need to do a couple of things if you haven't already. A fundraising program assessment. Think about this. Where's your fundraising program today? Do that capacity assessment. What's the capacity you have in your database and even beyond? And you're here. Here's your capacity. Here's where you want to go. How do you get there? How do you actually tap into that capacity? It's all about developing that major gifts program. Do you have a really strong strategic moves management program? Are you able to prioritize those donors after you've done that capacity? Are you doing truly targeted cultivation? Are you having 3 to 5 coffees or lunch meetings a week? Are you asking those questions? Are you finding out more? Are you getting donors excited about what you've got coming? This has been an interesting change for us as a firm over the last few years. We had so many organizations coming to us saying, hey, we get it and we want to do this work. We don't know how to do it. We actually developed some services around this because organizations were saying, hey, hands up, I don't know what to do here. If you want help, we can give you an outline for that. We can help you if you want. I'm not trying to sell you our services. I'm simply saying these are things you need to be thinking about. It doesn't hurt to have an outside partner. If that's something that you can't do internally, let us know. We can put you on the right path for that and talk to you about what we do if that's an interest that you have. What I'm really saying though is don't just let this go. Take some time, benchmark where you are, find out where you can be, and then work on setting that path. Walk hand in hand with those donors who want to lock arms with you and solve problems that you care deeply about. Go back to this. What if you had $6 million more dollars, $1 million more dollars, 500,000 more dollars, whatever in the scope of or proportion of where your organization is today? What if you could double that giving? The thing I'm saying here is you could do it, but you've got to focus on taking the right steps. All right, I'm going to come back to Q&A. I'm just going to give you a couple of resources here first, and then I'm going to stop sharing so we can do some Q&A. Be sure to follow us as a Winkler Group. You can follow me, my other principal, my partner, Jessica Browning. And if you want to follow up with either Jessica or me, feel free to do that. You can email me. It takes a little time for me to get back up. I sometimes get a lot of emails. Here's the thing though, I promise we'll make sure to connect back. We'll make sure to get those questions answered. So, all right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and we're going to go into Q&A because we've got some time left. Boy, I feel like that was a lot of questions. So we'll jump right in to Q&A. Rachel, do you want to help lead with some questions?
Sure. Hello, everybody. We have some great questions in Q&A. One of them is, how can I justify spending so much time with donors? What about clients and the mission?
Yep. All right. That's always a question that feels like it might be tough to answer, but here's the honest answer. If you invested 20% of more time with donors who could fund 80% more of your mission, that would probably be the best ROI you could ever have. I'm going to say it in another way as well. I'm on a weight loss journey right now. When I started this, I wasn't seeing quick results and I got kind of frustrated. And a friend of mine said, well, how much time are you spending on the treadmill? And I was like, I don't know. I'm spending a couple of times a week. And she said, well, then you're probably getting a couple of times a week results. So then I got on the treadmill and I got on there every day and holy wow, I started seeing a lot of weight loss. My point in saying this is you don't get anything you want without investing time. You invest some time now, you find the funds that maybe you can then hire that development person. In the meantime, you're building stronger relationships and ultimately you're going to be able to serve more clients and expand your mission because of that. I don't believe in an excuse of I can't do this because then I won't be able to do that. You've got to find a balance. If you don't find a balance, you're going to stay right where you are. I don't want to stay the weight that I am. So I had to figure out, how do I find time? I have a crazy busy schedule. I'm on a lot of planes. I'm all over the country. But you know what I did? I found the time to do it. And it's paying off. So hard lesson, but you got to make a commitment to do it. Rachel.
This feels like it could be a related follow-up question from an anonymous attendee, but the question is, what if your major donors are all in other states?
Oh yeah. Hey gang, you know what? What are we on today? We're on Zoom. COVID taught us another lesson. People are used to being connected remotely. People aren't worried so much. Donors, by the way, aren't expecting that you're going to get on a plane and go talk to them. You can do the exact same thing that we're doing here, and you can do it by Zoom. I would actually say, don't do it over the phone. Do it by Zoom. Older people have trouble with technology. You got to make it super simple. That we've experienced that. Gang, we sometimes do campaign studies where we interview donors 100% virtually. We do a lot of national association campaigns. Donors are all over the world. We interview them online. We interview them just like this. Donors today are used to it. They will connect with you online. Do not let that stop you. Okay, next question.
Lynn asks, we are a young organization that is just looking to start approaching corporations to obtain sponsorships. What is the best way to introduce ourselves to local corporations?
Yeah, well, first, I would question whether those sponsorships are the best way for you to raise money. Here's the thing: corporate giving went down. We're not going to see it go up. We're seeing all the profits going into the market. Stockholders are getting money, not people. Okay. So don't expect corporate giving to be high. Now, how do you get in? You have to have a relationship. Let me give you an example. Probably some of you may know this. Boeing here in Charleston has their giving, right? They have an office focused on that. They get thousands of asks a month. All right. Who do they pay attention to? They pay attention to two groups. One, where they get the most marketing exposure, right? Which could be things like Trident Tech and their aeronautics program, right? They invest in that because they see a return on that. The other place that they invest or that pay attention to are those people and organizations where there's a relationship. So the answer again is find somebody. You've got to build a relationship. You need an internal advocate and an ambassador who is going to champion your ask all the way through the channels. Because once you get into those channels, they can take a long time, and you need somebody internally. It goes back to creating relationships. How do I do that? You got to find a connection to them, right? It's the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, or separation, right? You got to find who knows them. You got to get introduced. You got to figure out a way to start a relationship. All right, next.
Pearl asks, do you find that the GivingUSA trends track honestly across all nonprofit sectors,
Yeah,
i.e. medical, children, etc.?
Got it. Yep. You know what? You know where we saw some growth in giving last year in terms of types of organizations? We saw human services, education. You guys went up. That's fantastic. Okay. And we saw a little bit of growth in arts and cultural, interestingly enough, because that's not often where we see growth. That's usually a pretty small slice that stays kind of constant. So are those trends across the board? Yes, we saw some growth in giving. However, yeah, we're working with organizations all across. And remember, the GivingUSA report reports across all sectors. So yes, it truly was across all sectors.
Benjamin asks, is there any data on the average time between gifts to DAFs and the distribution of those funds?
Yeah, there probably is, Benjamin. I don't have that in front of me. But I will tell you, one of the things that we are concerned about as a sector, particularly the Giving Institute that I'm on the board of, that is firms from all across the country. What we're concerned about are those gifts that sit in the DAF, because the DAF funds are purposely holding them. So we're on Capitol Hill pretty regularly trying to influence some legislation that will help make that better. You'll hear from the Fidelities, you'll hear from those trusts that are all saying, oh, we're giving more than we ever before. Yeah, they are, but they're still not giving enough. The purpose of those DAF funds is not to hold that money. The purpose was for it to be directed to those organizations. So I don't know what that data is. I bet you could Google and find it. But what I will say is I feel like it's getting longer and longer. That's my take on what I think is happening.
I'll also add that the National Council of Nonprofits reports out on DAFs.
Yeah.
So they might have some resources available on their website, and Fidelity does make a lot of their information public.
Yeah.
We've looked at them before as a firm when we're writing up our own reports. So maybe check out those sites, although they might be a little bit biased towards themselves.
Yeah, you gotta understand the context of who's reporting the data. Yep.
The next question is from an anonymous attendee. I appreciate your points about donor retention. What would you say to management that wants their fundraisers to focus more on acquisition and new major gifts rather than maybe the less exciting or flashy work of stewardship and deepening existing relationships?
Yeah, I'd first start to look at capacity. So I would look at what capacity do your donors have today? That's the first place to start. Because if you're like almost every other organization, those folks giving annually are often giving significantly under their capacity. So in understanding what the capacity is, then that helps us make the case for if we could build a stronger relationship and we could get their giving to go up to be more in line with their capacity, we would get a lot more money from people who are already in our database. And there are reports. Google lifetime value of donors. Just Google that term and go take a look at what you see, because there are some models out there that illustrate what the lifetime value of a donor is. If you keep them engaged, if you keep them 5 years, you're likely to keep them 10 years, as long as they're something in their life doesn't change, where, you know, like their giving doesn't change because of a life situation that happens. So the whole point of this, though, is there's lots of data out there that talks about that lifetime value and makes the case for why. But look at capacity first, how they're giving, what the capacity is. And that, to me, ought to be a really good argument for why we need to spend time. I'm not saying don't spend time on acquisition, but you need to spend more time on retention, because that's where bigger giving is going to come from.
We have 2 final questions.
Okay.
One is from Ashley. As a board member, I feel we are continuously shifting from crisis to crisis. How do we become more intentional and support our ED and staff rather than raise alarms and cause panic? Is there a magic reset button or a dummies guide that we can read and embrace?
Yeah. You know what, Ashley, that probably needs some follow-up, because I have lots of thoughts. So let me give you a couple of general thoughts. As a board, do you have a strategic plan? And if your organization has a strategic plan, above all things else, that should be our marker. That should be our port that we know we're going towards. So you want to start there. I think secondly, we need to define what a crisis is. And we need to get real clear on whether something truly needs to be a crisis and what our role in that is. I think there's a whole lot more to go into that. But I don't know that we can get into all of it. It sounds like, but I'd like to hear it, because you really intrigued me by the question. I have lots of thoughts on it, but I'd like to hear more context to be able to give you more perspective. So let's follow up.
All right. And our last question from Alana. What are the strategies to understand the capacity of a donor?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay. One, you can hire a firm. We do that work for you. So that's one way. And again, because we have all the tools, we've already bought all the tools. And so we have them at our disposal. If you want to do it, you're looking at things like wealth screening. You like Wealth Engine, Donor Search, iWave. There's a bunch of them out there. I'm not telling you which one's better than which. It depends on you. So that's a place to start. It's that wealth screening. And then in doing some capacity analysis, we're looking at current giving, and we're looking at what someone's financial capacity is. And we can look at what realistic growth in giving. This is where it gets a little bit hard, because you need some guidance on that. But that's what you got to do. You got to start the wealth screening. You got to start at creating a model of what your growth in giving could look like if you paid attention to it. So wealth screen, you've got some predictive AI that you can use out there as well. I like peer rating. That's getting a small group of people in a room who know these donors, who can give you feedback truly about their capacity, but more important, about their affinity. And we've got a really good white paper on that we can make sure to send. If you reach out to us, and tell us that you ask that question again, we'll send you that white paper. And I think it'll answer some more of those questions. All right, gang, I know we're at the top of the hour, and we promised to keep this at 1 hour. So I'll say this, Brett and Bryson, if you want to close us out, please feel free to do so. I just want to say thanks again, everybody, for giving us this time together. I hope you found this valuable, and I hope you'll take advantage of some of our resources, because we are constantly putting stuff out there that we hope will help grow this sector and make us all better at building authentic relationships. So thank you again, Bryson and Brett, and Rachel. Thank you so much for being my co-host as well. I'll turn it over to you guys.
Jim and Rachel, thank y'all so much. What a really fabulous resource for us. And yeah, we encourage people to reach out to Winkler with follow-up questions. And also we have a development peer network on the Together SC website where we can do some follow-up conversations and chat as development staff members and team members. Thank y'all, truly, we appreciate it.
And just to echo what Bryson said, thank you, Jim. Thank you, Rachel, Winkler Group. Great presentation. A lot of great information. I have some notes here, so definitely look forward to kind of reevaluating on my own end. But like Bryson said, we're certainly welcome to more discussions, whether that's with the Development Peer Network or with the AFP Lowcountry chapter. So thank you all also for attending today.
Have a great day, everybody. Take care. Bye.